let's jump right into really becoming a better communicator. A couple things you need to know about this is I am going to tell you, what I've learned. Not necessarily all that I know, but what I've learned. There's a difference when you get information from a book. You can get revelation from people, and I want you to know that's what I really want to be able to do here is give you the revelation that I have because of what I've learned through trial and error, what I've assimilated from different courses and different materials and different books and different, literally hours of training on the ancient lost art of rhetoric, and the trivium and the quadrivium and blah, 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 blah. But the end of the day is really revelation comes from people, and I want to impart to you what I've learned to how to be the best communicator you can be, whether you are in front of 4 or 4,000 people. So first thing I want to just mention when it comes to communication is I want you to know what you do when you communicate, when you speak, when you are a part of this process, is you are writing yourself into someone's story. It's always understated, but I gotta highlight it. This art form of communication, you literally take and embody a phrase, a sentence, a paragraph, a chapter in someone else's story. I'm always reminded about the boy and the 5 loaves and the 3 fish, or the 2 fish. Basically, fish and chips is Long John Silver's, value basket with the hush puppies. Which, let's be honest, those are delicious. They'll kill you, but they're delicious. The truth is I'm reminded how he comes up to the disciples and Jesus, and this boy literally writes himself into 5,000 other stories. Some scholars would say even up to 10,000, just by saying, "Hey, here's what I have for you." Well, so where was I? All right. So when you talk about communication, you're writing yourself into someone's story. The second thing I want to talk about when it comes to the art of communication as you journey, you need to know this is please stop comparing your story. So the second thing I just want to say is when you journey to do this, stop comparing your story. As a speaker, as a communicator, as a pastor, as a preacher, as a public school giver of hope, whatever you do with the art of communication, stop looking on the internet at someone's highlight reel and stop looking at their form and their art form and comparing it to you in a negative way. This is a very slippery slope. This can be a very great tool to pull you in a direction, to shape you, to help you, but it can also be something, if it's unhealthy, that can cripple you, that will take your voice and you'll become an echo, not a voice. And you'll never really emerge in that. There is a whole series on comparison in the Acts Academy. It's actually part of the Path to an Acts. So make sure you check that out if you haven't taken that Acts course. The Acts courses are about 5 to 8 minutes long, usually 3 to 6 videos. There's some workbooks, but there's a whole one on comparison that I really want you to take if you haven't taken it. But just to remind you, don't compare your story with someone else, because the truth is there's always going to be somebody who's logged more hours. It's like riding a bicycle when you first ride it, and then someone who rides in the Tour de France or something. There are different levels, and everybody starts somewhere, but you got to start, and you got to be intentional about your growth as a communicator, just like you would in the gym with your physical appearance or your strength or whatever it else is in your life that you want to get better at. The third thing I want to just remind you when it comes to communication is continue to write your own stories. I just want to encourage you all, though, to please continue to write your own story. Does that make sense? Because you gotta like write yourself into someone's story in the art of communication. But you also have to not compare yourself as a communicator, but then you got to like become the communicator that you're supposed to. And so what I want to say simply is that's why the Acts Academy exists. The Acts Academy exists for you to emerge in the path that you are to take so you can build in the blaze what God has for you to do. One thing I want to show you real quick is pretty cool. And as I grab this, hey, real quick, if you have a Samsung and I can't even read it, something hello, maybe, I don't know. Mute your phone for me, both of you. Thank you, amazing. I just want to show you something that's really cool. I made this for you because I want you to know when it comes to writing your own story, I've created a path to an axe. Here's this verse in Kings where Elijah has the axe head that floats, and then here's the axe presentation. I actually have my name on the bottom of my handle, but I made this in a way to allow you to have a goal in mind when it comes to journeying to earn your own axe. I want to ship this to you. I want you to earn this from me. I want you to journey. It could be 2 years. It might even be a year. But I want you to be able to take that information, the revelation, and those 7 areas that are critical for your life through the Axecast, through the webinars, through the assigned readings, through all of the questions that you get to dialogue with me one-on-one. And I want to help sharpen you as a leader. And I want to ship that to you after you complete what I think is essential to launch you as far as I can with what I know. A couple things that you need to know right away about just the Acts Academy. If you aren't familiar with this, we sharpen your life in 7 areas: Christ teachings, career and calling, culture engagement, critical thinking, creative power, and communication skill. And it's at your own pace. It's designed so you can take it in and it's not overwhelming. The Axecasts are usually 18 minutes. The extended episode's 12. You can ask a question. You can take these Axe courses anytime. They're usually 3 to 5, segments in length, 5 to 10 minutes a piece. It's really so designed to not rob you of your time, but also give you the time that it takes to really soak it in. I'm telling you, there's so much about the learning process where you have to wring a sponge in with information. You got to also wring that sponge out and let it soak. So I don't want to overwhelm you with information and revelation and assignments and all the rest of it. I've designed it as lean as I can to continue to be the content that you are asking for. And by the way, that reminds me, hey, get your questions in this month. Those of you that are part of the Acts Academy, we're going to be filming a bunch of content in October. I want to answer those questions and send them out to you via video. If you are not a part of the Acts Academy, use the code SWINGAWAY10 and get a free month. And I'll just simply say this. I want to celebrate this. We have crossed over 100 students and or supporters that are part of the Acts Academy right now. It's amazing. It launched last November. We're a year later, and we have 100 people that are journeying to find themselves, to deepen themselves, to be intentional in their personal growth. I am so happy about that. I celebrate that fully. Continue to support what's supporting you. I'm going to offer as much free as I can, but we're about 200 people away for this whole thing to be self-sustainable. We're going to keep going. We're going to keep investing, and we're going to pray that we get to that spot. So if you're part of it, stick around. If you are a part of it, tell other people to come join us. If you're here on a free sort of login or whatever the case is, don't quit here. There's 7 other areas we want to work with you, not just communication. So let's talk real quick about the chemicals or the chemical reactions that happen when we're talking about communication. This is really important to note. This is something that I want you to all sort of master as a part of becoming a better communicator. So communication writes yourself into someone's story. When you're not comparing your story, you write your own story. And when you're talking from a story perspective or from a communicating perspective, you need to know the chemicals of communication. Okay, so I call this the art of the chemicals. A couple things that come to mind. The first chemical is this, dopamine. Dopamine happens in your audience when you radically increase tension. Let me give you an example. I'm going to tell you a joke, okay? And it's a good joke. You're going to love it. Are you ready? Everybody listening? Take a note. This is a really good joke. Okay, it's a cliffhanger right now. I'm not going to tell you a joke. My point is you listening to me, wanting to tell you the joke, immediately there's a chemical reaction in your brain that says, what's the joke? Tell me the joke. I need to know the joke. When you radically increase tension, you create high levels of dopamine in your audience. And that suspense that you build, those cliffhangers, help them focus, help them retain, motivate them to invite themselves into your message. That's the first chemical. Dopamine. You do that with tension. I like to say this. You can write this down. If you have tension, you have your audience's attention. Dopamine and tension go hand in hand. Chemical number 2, oxytocin. Oxytocin, not the stuff that Brett Favre used to take. Although he was an amazing Packer quarterback, we'll move on for another time. But oxytocin, how you get oxytocin into your audience is you create empathy. You show the humanity of it all. I'll give you an example. Okay, so just a couple seconds ago, I was literally upstairs. I mean, literally upstairs, moments before our webinar started, and here's me like making dinner for my kids. Nate's like, where are you? And I'm like, I'm making dinner for these amazing little kids. I just by showing you a picture of my family, just by talking about my family from that perspective, what that does is that reveals the humanity of it, of me. That reveals, let's just simply say, like maybe even a chink in the armor. But when you feel or reveal your humanity or what you're learning versus what you know, or when you really kind of break down who you are, not on the stage but off the stage, your audience immediately creates trust, like a bond. Oxytocin is a bonding chemical with you and your audience. Don't be afraid to speak from the heart. You speak from the heart and you speak to their heart, their head will always arrive. Know when it's appropriate, know when to use that, but when you create empathy, you create oxytocin. Second chemical. Third, endorphins. Endorphins are pretty easy. It's just with humor. When you make people laugh, when you smile, when you tell a joke, when you pull the rug out from underneath your audience, you're creating endorphins in their body. And when you create those endorphins, what happens is your audience is relaxed and they're creative and they're ready to receive your message. These are 3 very important chemicals that you need to know. And we're going to reference these later. But as you're preparing your messages or your speeches or anything that you're going to speak in front of an audience, whether it's 4 or 400 or 4,000, you need to know what chemical you're using and when you're using it, and try and get all three of those chemicals within your message, preferably your intro or the first 5 minutes of your talk right away. Because what that does is it really sets the table for everything else. Is this manipulating your audience? Is this playing with their minds in a sense? You could argue, but I'll just simply say no. I think it's actually giving them the human experience. You're restoring back what they're craving for in the first place. I mean, we're lost in the human experience. Like, this is not the human experience. Facebook, social media, Instagram, texting, even this form of communication is the best that we can do digitally, but we're meant to have more. And when you use those tools and you create those God-given chemicals in people's minds, it creates a reaction in their body so they're ready to receive your message. Great communicators use these chemicals, and they use them all at once in different times and always up front in their message, because it prepares their audience. Because life is nothing like that for most of our audience. People come in stressful. They come with high level of adrenaline and cortisol. They come in unfocused. They come in irritable. They come in from their day. They come in from their drive in. They come in from all different places. And then they sit down in front of you, and they're not really them yet. That's why those comedians that are the headlining comedians like Brian Regan or Jim Gaffigan, that's why there's always an opener for those acts. Because when people come in off the street, they're not them yet. They're just not who they really are. They've got too much adrenaline, too much cortisol to really be them. Our jobs as communicators is help them discover their humanity again. And you do that through the use of these 3 God-given chemicals to start to disarm them, help them remember, and help them focus, on your message. I alluded to it a bit, but I do this in my Evernote. Here's just a tip for you. If you take notes in a journal or in some sort of like Moleskin or a digital form like Evernote, create a bucket. Create 3 buckets, really, of these 3 chemicals, of the endorphins, of the oxytocin, and of the dopamine. And when you're out in the world, or when you're reading a book, or when you're, blasted with that moment of inspiration, put that story in that bucket for that chemical. We can sort our material and other topics, like love and humanity and hope and justice, and like you can come up with it topically like that. But I would encourage you to copy paste and also include those in the buckets of the chemicals that you're trying to create. So when you're looking at your message, when you're looking at the message that you're giving, and you need to pull from a library, you're also pulling from a library to really make sure that all 3 of those are present within your talk. I hope that makes sense, but categorize your material as you find it in those 3 chemicals. Then you can actually pull those chemicals and use those when you need them for your audience to be more relaxed or creative, or they got to trust you, or there's going to be a level of generosity, or you need them to focus on something, or whatever the case may be. Group them by way of chemical. Is there any questions so far about kind of what happens when you write yourself into someone's story? Talked a little bit about comparing your story. There's a whole ACTS course on that. You need to take that. And then actually writing your own story. That's part of the reason why the ACTS Academy exists, to help you do that well. And then talking about those 3 chemicals specifically, the art of them and what they do, and how you can literally elicit that human response within them. And then obviously your audience comes in with a high level of stress, adrenaline, and cortisol. Is there any questions about any of that so far? You can unmute yourself and just fire away, and I'll do my best to answer it before we go. I just want to make sure you got all of that.
Eric, I've got a quick question.
Yep.
Yeah, so you talked about the 3 chemicals, which is so good. And is there a sort of rhythm that you find is helpful in terms of those 3?
Right.
And obviously, yeah. Yeah.
That's a great question. It's Nick, right?
Yeah.
Nick, that's a great question. So Nick's asking, is there a rhythm? Nick, I would say this: in the front, let's say 1/3, if I had to guess, I kind of have done this maybe just instinctively, but I do know that within the first, if it's a half-hour talk, within the first 6 minutes, or let's say, 12 minutes or whatever you want to do, I like to try and get all of those chemicals as tight as I can in the first part of my message. Like I'll give you a quick example. Like when I go and I'm in Canada, I used to name the provinces of Canada and the territories, and now I do that with the capitals and the whole crowd cheers. And then I reveal, that I'm a dad and I'm a Netflix subscriber. Always gets a sort of a joke there, and then I usually tell them some sort of cliffhanger when it comes to a story. I'm trying to pack all those in an intro, if you will.
Yep.
And then when you're looking at a rhythm, when you do this, we'll talk about this in a little bit, Nick. But there's an exercise that I do with note cards for your parts of your talk, and then you lay them all out on the floor, and then you have to flip over those cards, and you got to look. And sometimes, man, what happens is in your mind it sounds great, and then you're just looking at these cards, and you're like, empathy, sad story, crying song, slow James Taylor tune. You know what I mean? And you're just like, all of a sudden you're looking and you're like, man, I've been down here way too long.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I also, just a side note, beyond that exercise, try and get them packed into the top. And then I like to try and pack them into the conclusion. Try to get those 3 there in the beginning and those 3 there at the end, because it's kind of sets the tone, and it kind of helps them remember how they feel, even remember what you say, but how they feel at the end. The other thing I would say, Nick, as far as a rhythm, is it's going to change for your audience. It's going to change on your age group and the cognitive ability of who you're in front of.
Yeah.
I speak in front of kindergartners in public schools, and I speak in front of churches with people who are 80 and 90 years old. So the gamut is just so wide, and I have to use different tools at different times, especially when it comes to who your audience is. And so in the beginning and in the bottom, the kind of the intro and the outro of the whole message, I try and pack all 3 in there instinctively and intentionally. And then when it comes to the middle of your message or the body of it, you just got to make sure you're not all laughs the whole time, or you're not all whatever. It just depends on the art of your talk or what what you're creating. And then, it depends on your audience, on what age group and what's going to be the best thing for them cognitively, for them to stay with you. Kindergartners don't do well with cliffhangers. Junior high ministry, you have to tell them what you're going to do. You have to do it. And then you have to tell them what you just did, So that's how you talk to junior hires. College and career, they tension all day. That's why they binge watch Netflix, because these writers of these shows resolve tension, and then they dump in a bunch of dopamine. And I don't know about anybody out there, but I have, you get done watching that one last episode of that season, and you're like, oh crap, I got to wait till next February for Stranger Things again. This is awful. Because you got so much dopamine dumped into you at that point, you want to resolve all that tension, and it's months down the road. College and career, I mean, dude, they'll eat that up. The more tension you can have, the better. So the rhythm's different, I guess, is my point. And we can talk about that specifically, offline in a question that maybe you ask as part of the acts, or we could do something like that to equip you better with that. Any other questions?
I got one.
Okay, shoot.
So when you're doing your stories at the beginning and then your stories at the end to create those chemical responses, are you using the same stories and connecting them back?
Yeah, that's one tool that you can use. You don't have to, but that's
and yay for the Canada reference, by the way, Eric.
What'd you say?
I said, and yay for the Canada reference, by the way.
Happy Thanksgiving, y'all. So what I was going to say is, you can reference them back. That is a teaching technique that is called inclusion. I'm not going to go into that tonight. I go into that in an ACTS course in depth, but inclusion is ending the same way you began, but in a different way. I'll give you an example. The story of Joseph in the Bible, the coat of many colors. Even if you're not a Christian, you maybe have heard of the play. He's going to rule over his brothers. He has this dream. These reeds are bowing down before him. He tells them, they throw him into a pit. That story ends with his brothers bowing down before him, only he's not on a pit, he's in a throne. So it ends and begins the same way, but only different. And I got to be honest with you, that's probably one of my favorite things to do with inclusion intention is I will start something and it'll feel like it's in left field. And then at the end, it's just almost like it puts a big bow on the whole talk, because it's like the beginning, nothing was wasted. And we'll talk about wasting nothing, and some of the other aspects of this, but I hope that answers your question. Any other questions when it comes to that? What's happening in your audience's brain? I'm going to repeat one more time. Man, there's a load of you on here. I'm so proud of you. Thank you. I hope you all are ACTS supporters or subscribers long-term. You're the reason I'm doing this. I got plenty to do, but I don't want it to be about where Eric is going. I want to be about how can I help you get there. Thank you for being a part of this. I'm going to get emotional. I got to get off of that topic. Okay. So I'll just say this. We're probably not going to be able to cover all of this. I guess some of the other mechanics of the C4 process, because it's 7:37 and I want to honor your time. But if you do use that code SWINGAWAY10, you'll have a month to do it for free. If you join or support the ACTS Academy for $100 a year, for $10 a month, you can come back and we can watch this. You can go through all of this content on your own. We can do this in some question and answer forums. In December, we'll do another ACTS course webinar on communication specifically, especially on some of the stuff that we don't get to and some of the questions that you come up along the way. I did want to just kind of launch into this C4 process, because there's really four C's that I think have to be there for every talk, have to be there for every message. And write them down if you got them. It's clear, creative, compelling, and continuing. Every message has to be clear. It's got to be creative. It's got to be compelling, and it's got to be continuing. There's got to be a now what, so what. There's got to be a draw, an attraction, a resonance. There's got to be an element that feels like it came in a package, and it's got to be clear, because if it's not clear, it's lost. So let's just talk a little bit about clear first, because I think this is essential, and we'll probably stay here for a couple minutes, and then I'll leave some time for some question and answer at the end. When I say clear, you have to be clear first with your message. You have to have the message clear for you. Now, one way that I have done this is I have created what's called an anchor sentence. It's the sentence that is your talk that you always go back to. There's a comedian and a friend, his name is Ken Davis, and he calls it something a little bit different, but really along the same lines. There is a statement that you always come back to. If you look at the wall in your office, or if you're in your car, imagine a wall. Please don't hit a wall in your car. But if you look at like the walls, there's, the drywall. I've got this really cool wall back here with all this neat artifacts from all over the world. But I mean, this one doesn't look so good, and the one over there, it's just got this janky Aruban flag there. That's amazing. It reminds me of paradise. But the point is this, you see everything on the wall, but you don't see the 2x4s. But the 2x4s, the structure, that's actually holding up the wall. And your anchor statement is this for your talk, for your sermon, for your message, for whatever it is the thing that holds up everything else. And if it's not clear for you, it'll never be clear for your audience. And don't start getting creative, and don't waste your time with some cool illustration and the chemicals and like how you're going to make this awesome and have this little prop where you're going to put a little pearl underneath everybody's seat, and you're going to be, you know, like Rob Bell, or you're going to be like whoever you're going to be like, you know, don't even waste your time trying to get all whatever it is until it's clear for you. Because if it's not clear for you, it'll never be clear for your audience. So you've got to take this anchor statement and really formulate it. I'll give you some tools to do this. Like, let's just say, give me a topic. Somebody unmute and just give me a topic. Unmute and just give me a topic. Something random, like pancakes or, you know, whatever. Just unmute and give me a topic. I'm listening.
Winnipeg.
Winnipeg. Okay. Every junior hire can survive a Winnipeg winter because of these 3 fundamental techniques. Every follower of Christ every hockey fan should stay away from Winnipeg. No, every Minnesota hockey fan should stay away from Winnipeg because the Jets are lethal because of these 3 reasons. Whatever the case may be, there's a couple things going on there that I just want to highlight. You take a topic, you take the idea, the big main sort of keyword, and every single one of your messages will be can or should. Okay, write that down. Everything you ever say publicly, it's going to be persuasive or it's going to be enabling. There's no other way. There's just 2. You're either going to say your audience can do this or your audience should do this. Every great sermon, you can do this or you should do this. There's nothing else other than can and should. We could argue this till the day is long. Trust me, I've tried. Every person can, every Christian can, every student should, every mom should. Every single bit of communication is going to be can or should. Now, here's the trick. What I've noticed, especially when it comes to public speaking, they usually end the audience. They usually end different for your audience. Sorry, the opposite. Let me say that one more time. I've noticed that when you start out persuasive, it usually ends enabling. When you start out enabling, it usually ends persuasive. So, in other words, you know, every person can change their oil in their car by following these 3 simple steps. Here are the benefits of why you should do this. It's going to save money. It's going to, you know, build memories with your kids. It's, you know, so you got to see that flip flop. You know, if you're writing something for a college audience and you're a preacher, I'm thinking about one guy that's on here right now. It's Josiah. He's launching into his ministry for Chi Alpha. But Josiah, when you are going to write a sermon, it's going to be can, and then it's going to be, well, you should. You're going to, you know, persuade them to do that at the end. If you're going to persuade them, you're going to give them some ways how they can do this in their life. So it's always going to be can or should. It's always going to have a keyword of what you're talking about, like a key couple words. I like to use different words at different times, but there's some key words that you need to find. And I talk a little bit more about this in depth in the C4 process. But it's also going to have tension, and usually 2 to 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 rationale, 10 keys, 10 points, 10 ideas, 10 ways, 10 kites, 10 pucks, 10 thoughts, 10 ideas. You know, there's always going to be a numerical value with some sort of rationale when it comes to your talk. And so you're really trying to create a sentence that says every person should be a follower of Christ because of these 2 reasons found in the book of John. Every person should understand how they can be a voice in this world by the three benefits of joining the Acts Academy. You know, you're really looking for that keyword, you're looking for that tension, you're looking for that can or should, and you're really trying to say it in one sentence and say it well. This takes some practice. This is not easy to do. And a lot of times this anchor statement will never end up in your talk because it feels clumsy and it's kind of ugly and it's raw 2x4s in your talk. It just is, you know, kind of clammy, you know, like every person can dream beyond when dreams shatter because of these two thoughts in the book of Proverbs, you know, or these two teachings from the life of Christ. You know, you're never going to say that in your message. You could, and I have, but it's an ugly sort of 2x4 anchor statement that you are just getting clear where if you had to name your message in one sentence, what is it? Now, when I say because of these three keyword reasons, what you're doing is you're setting up the rationale to then go through each of the reasons. When I tell you every person can make pancakes in the morning by following these three steps, immediately you're thinking, well, what are these steps? There's three of them. I want to know how to make pancakes. All great YouTube writers, everybody who's a YouTuber that's killing it doing that, that's what they do. They just are can or should, and then they create that tension, and you're like, I want to know how to make pancakes. Tell me the steps. So you want to be able to get your talk down to one sentence. Like I said, it's going to have that tension. It's going to enable or persuade. It's going to have those keywords. It's going to launch your rationale. And then the other thing I want to just point out, this is really the fourth thing or so, is you have to define your audience in the first little bit. So every junior high boy should, every mom from 30 to 50. Does that make sense? You want to try and narrow in and define your audience in a broad perspective sometimes, in a real narrow niche perspective sometimes as well. Really depends on who you're talking with. This is key for your message, but for your growth. And this is really the anvil that launches everything. Every person should be a member, every young leader should be a member of the Acts Academy because of these three reasons. Every speaker can become a better communicator by these four keys found in the C4 course. That's really saying your message in one statement. The other thing I want to just say about this real quick before we move on to that, beyond that, is people ask me all the time, hey, how do you do that without notes? Like, how do you preach for 60 minutes with no notes? Well, there's a few things where I've memorized the parts of my message, and there's things, you know, I'm using a Bible, but it's really, I have an anchor statement and I know it. And like when I get lost in my talk, or I get lost in the moment, or I'm having fun with a student, or just something crazy happens in the room, you just go back to that. You go back to that statement. It just keeps bringing you back to that. So really start there. Next thing I want to do when it comes to clear, I want you to take note cards for whatever sermon that you write, whatever talk that you give, whatever message you're going to do. And I want you to write on that note card on the front of it, that sort of key part of the outline, you know, so it's like the intro, it's like a transitional statement, it's whatever you are at with your own speech writing. But on the back of that note card, I want you to say, how is your audience going to be feeling on one side? And then B, what is the chemical that you want to elicit, or that you are eliciting on the front side? So the idea with speech act theory, not to bore you here, but there's locution, there's the speaker's words, what's said, there's elocution, the words and the effects, there's perlocution, the hearer responds. It's fancy, big, huge words. Perlocutionary intention, the intention for the listener. I'm not going to bore you with the speech act theory, but I will help you understand why it makes sense. When you get your message in the sort of formative standpoint, or when you're done, creating your talk, write it out on note cards in bullet form, if you will. And then on the back of that card, write the response that you want your audience to have, and then write the chemical on the other side of the back of the note card that you think that content or that content will deliver. And what happens when you do that exercise with the main parts of your talk, when you're telling a story about yourself, or you're telling a story about something from the Bible, or something from another book, or whatever it is, you actually can see if what you're saying is going to align with the chemical that is going to be elicited or going to be responded, but then also what you're trying to do and what you need to do in that moment as a communicator, how you want your audience to feel. You'll be able to see those working together, or you'll notice that's really not going to work there. At the same time, when you get those outlined on your note cards, you flip them all over and you just look at how you want your audience to feel and the chemical that you're using. You get to really look real close and see, back to Nick's point, the rhythm where you're like, oh man, I've been down here. This section is all funny. This whole section is funny. I need to sprinkle some more funny in here, or I need to move some tension from the top. I got no tension here. I lose all the tension in my message. I'm just giving them information. And so then you'll find that rhythm, to Nick's question, on the back of those note cards to really understand, better what is being said from what is being heard. And that's why that, speech act theory really works well. Let's think about what else I want to do here on this C part of clear. This is a huge part. We're not going to get to the other parts tonight about creative and compelling. We can do that another time. You can watch those videos. I want to make sure that I really nail this. You got to be clear, not only in your message, but you got to be clear in your audience. Who is your audience? When it comes to age, demographics, differences, elementary to elderly, what is your audience? You need to know who your audience is so you can meet them where they're at and bring them where they need to be. How I approach a kindergartner when I'm doing a public school is completely different than how I approach a junior in high school. You need to know who you're going to be in front of, where this topic or this talk or this sermon or this speech is going to live. And you need to know your audience. And the reason I say that is, if you aim at everything, you'll hit nothing. Wayne Gretzky said, you'll miss 100% shots that you never take, something like that, hockey metaphor. But the point is you got to be in a niche and you got to know your audience. And if you go too broad, you might miss it. And what you don't want to do is create a message not knowing who your audience is, and then, well, obviously you totally missed the mark. So dig into that a little bit and find out not only who your audience is from an age perspective, demographic perspective, but what's happening in the surrounding area of their world. What's going to be appropriate? What's going to be, what's going to happen in a way that will meet them where they are, if that makes sense. That'll keep you out of a lot of trouble, especially if you ever do communicating in different countries or different cultures. The other thing I want to say is you need to be clear on the venue. How big a room are you going to be in? What's it going to look like? What is it used for when you're not there? You need to be clear on the authority that you've been given. This has got me into a lot of trouble through the years. where I'll come in and I'll say something, especially in a church setting from a pulpit, that isn't my place to say, and I need to be more of a prophetic crock pot than a microwave, if you will, and I just need to maybe hold those cards and do that offline and not just blurt that out. So you need to be clear on the authority before you walk out on that stage, like who's allowing you to be there, who's going to really empower you, and where are your boundaries, where's the box that you can live in. And then I also want you to be clear on their achieved goal. Like if you are a hired speaker or if you have a job, what is the goal? What is the bullseye? What is that, mark that they're looking for you to hit, or that role to fill? These are all questions about your message that you need to be clear on before you even like write the message, if you will. And so really by asking that question, why are you there, helps bring that into fold. We got a couple questions that came in. Are there other times in your talk you want to use story or use those chemicals? Yes, of course. You always need to be a parent of those. Not all the time. You just need to understand where those are and when those are, and have a good rhythm for your audience, specifically for your audience. But all I could really say is pack them in the beginning and the end, and then don't be Captain Empathy the whole time, or Captain Laughy Pants the whole time either. That's not going to work. There's a balance, there's an art form to it, but if you put it in the beginning and you put it in the end, it's going to start well, and they're going to remember, how they felt and what you said at the end. How would I communicate to a general audience was another question. That's a tough question, because I don't think there is a general audience. If you just logged on, Andrew, hit mute on your phone. Thanks, buddy. If there is a specific audience, I don't think any audience is ever general. I think there's going to be a nuance. One thing I'll say about audience real quick, don't ever forget that you are speaking to individuals in an audience, or an audience of individuals. I think a lot of communicators that I've watched that forget this, or they lose sight of this, where they think like the audience is where they deliver the message. It's almost like they lose that personal touch. There's a couple ways to really make your audience less general. And we talk about this in some of the creative aspects underneath creativity, but using their name, making eye contact, having your eye contact follow with punctuation. That's huge. Don't forget, the audience is individuals. Talk to an individual that's in the audience, not an audience of individuals, if that makes sense. People are never a distraction to your ministry. They are your ministry. Don't forget that if they're in the audience, they have a name. Interact with them, be with them. I think that'll help bring that general even into a focus. The code was swing away 10. Somebody asked that. Swing away and then just the number 10. Swing away and then the numerical number 10. All right, so let's open this up. It's going to be 8 o'clock. We've already gone for an hour, but we can go about 10 minutes over. If you need to go, you can go. But let's just open this up for some questions around this aspect of clear, or if you want to talk a little bit about what it means to be creative, compelling, or continuing, I'd be happy to shed a little bit of light on that. But let's maybe recap on what we talked about with just this first C of the 4 to really unpack all of this so it's clear for you.
I actually had a question. How have you handled speaking, whether it be a school or a group of people that has faced a recent tragedy? Suicide would be a perfect example. Like if you were a youth group or a school that just recently had a tragedy like that. And on the opposite end of it, when you're talking about being aware of our authority, how have you handled speaking on some open-handed non-salvation issues at different churches, where at the same time they were kind of important open-handed issues, if that makes sense. I know there's kind of a broad question, but
Let's handle those questions one at a time, because those are totally two different arenas in a sense. So yesterday I was in Kansas, and I was there because the community has been suffering from suicide. So to your question, David, I just did this, if you will. And part of that is handling it with grace. Yes. You never want to necessarily idolize those moments in a way that would, bring what you could say, a spiral effect. There's a proven sort of way where it actually becomes a necessary or an accepted out by our, violent reaction to someone's loss. And so you sort of have to handle that with a cool hand, and you have to know your authority. And I've always sort of shopped or sort of asked the people, especially principals or superintendents or people that I'm going to be in a public school setting, if I say this way, is this going to be okay? I'll even ask that before I even get on the stage. So it's clear with me and clear, with them. But one thing I do specifically with the community that's hurting is I use a lot of metaphor to help them place themselves in the story rather than telling specifics to that story. If you take the C4 course, those of you that did, there's something called the meeting of the minds, where you give enough of the information that they fill in the rest. This is really important to do in times of tragedy. You need to master this skill where you're giving metaphor and story, but you're not necessarily naming specifics. You're allowing them to fill in the blanks. You're allowing them to fill themselves into the story. That ownership piece really helps them journey through those sensitive issues. The other thing, not only have a cool hand in the use of metaphor, but from a faith perspective, man, you just got to rely on the Holy Spirit in those moments, because that's sometimes the only words that really make sense, are the ones that come not from you, but from Him. And I would encourage you, but I'll also, would challenge you too, to make sure that those words that you are in those moments, especially with an issue like that, that you're sensitive to that authority, that there's a cool hand, and you use metaphor. I think that's a huge tool that you can use when you're dealing with a sensitive issue like a death, like a suicide, like a tragedy. The other thing I'll say, just as a leader, don't use stupid cliches like, oh, this is all for a reason, or, God's up to something, like, don't give, God the credit that something darkness or the enemy did, right? Like, yes, no, not everything happens for a reason. Some things are just a damn tragedy, and we serve a God that can make reasons for anything, but some things just are awful. And, I think grief in that place doesn't become a roadblock for your audience. It becomes a roadway. And if you show them that roadway, it's okay to be human. That goes a long ways with them. Your other question surrounding theological topics, can you say that one more time for me? Because it was.
Yeah, I mean, I would describe it as, different open-handed issues that, yes, they don't affect or directly affect our salvation, but are important, like one, maybe even connected to tragedy, maybe just like.
What do you mean open-handed issue? You mean like the evidence of speaking in tongues, or can you drink, or like, transubstantiation, or like predestination, or like you talking about the like different theological differences for different streams of the kingdom?
No, you know what? I think with saying out loud, I think it's more about, like, say you have a super conservative church, and they're so conservative that they're kind of just not being Christ-like in their political conservativeness. and you kind of know that going in, but you know that it can offend people if you kind of touch on anything political. But then I think long story short, I think we're in a place in this country now where the line between politics and humanity has really been, and loving people has really been kind of blurred. Like, for example, it's tough not to talk about something like the Kavanaugh case when it involves sexual assault, and whether it was done or not, like that, there's hurting people there. Like, if you had to go into something like that, where it's political, but there's hurting people that we're called to serve, how do we, like, that's kind of more the situation I'm kind of talking.
We'll just talk about Kavanaugh for a second if you want. The truth is, man, I think as leaders, you need to be like Jesus and hit the middle of the fray. I think you as a pastor, if you are a pastor, it's our job as pastors to lead people well to the way of the Christ. And what would Jesus respond? How would Jesus do? What would he say in that situation? And I think that's a really good place to start. I think about Kavanaugh, and I think about the woman at the well. And I think about any one of us that is without sin, let us cast the first stone. And so I would simply say, when you handle those sensitive issues, what I have done personally, when I'm in a politically charged environment, which happens often, for me, I always give all sides of the equation. And I offer very simply, this is one perspective. This is the other perspective. And this is, I believe, the way of the Christ. And this is where we move forward. But don't forget, bro, it's your job to pastor people where they're at and love them first. And you can do that even if they don't agree with you, and if they don't, think like you, vote like you. Our churches should be filled with Democrats and Republicans and people from both sides of quote unquote the aisle. But when you start talking about political or, topics, I never demonize people. I always try and bring them back to the middle of the fray, to the way of the Christ. And I always make sure I'm speaking from a spirit of humility versus a spirit of authority in those cases. I think those three things carry you a long way when you're talking about, let's just say something like the Kavanaugh case, which you may or may not have to talk about, from the pulpit or, whatever the case may be. And the other thing, dude, man, if you don't have to go in the weeds with people, don't go in the weeds. If they bring it up, great, but just be sensitive to that. There's no sense in provoking it. I love what the Proverbs say: a soft answer turns away wrath, but grievous words stir up anger. And a timely word is like an apple of gold, a setting of silver. I think those words, like I said, those three things, I think those really set the table well for you to be able to handle those issues. When you're around those issues, you're going to have different perspectives. But I think we can have healthy dialogue and debate. But to your point, to be honest with you all, I think as a people, we've lost a little bit of our decency to be able to talk about issues that we disagree on, that bring a healthy compromise. We've lost a little bit of our humanity. Social media, for the good and the bad, has really allowed people to have an informal but very formal, private but very public form of communication that I don't think it's always helpful when we start talking about these realms of politics and procedure and people and proceedings in a realm that our government or us as humans, we're never meant to take a stand, at a seat at a keyboard. We're meant to look in the face of our brother or sister and talk that through and what that looks like. So I think sometimes we're even doomed from the start, especially if those conversations are happening, online. Other questions specifically about communication? Stay on topic with me here with that clear anchor statement, your audience, building your attention in your anchor statement, how to do that, about being persuasive or enabling. Any questions that you have about that? Any other questions about you as a communicator, something specifically that you just want to know, something that you're just curious about, something I can answer, that a question you have? Because, by the way, that's one thing that the Acts Academy does. I want you all to know this. I build Acts courses based on what you want to know. I answer questions based on the questions that you ask. There's a lot of leadership resources out there that they'll just tell you what they know and they'll just give you what they got. This is dynamic crowdfunding, crowd sharing sort of dance where we do this together. You got a question, I read and research, and I give you the best answer. And it's usually in those perspectives, and it's usually one of the way of the underpinning of a Judeo-Christian perspective. But the point is you have this role in creating the content that is for the Acts Academy, whether it be the questions or the Acts cast or the Acts courses. That's all from you, the users, telling me what you need to know, telling me what you wonder about, telling me what you want to be better at, and me helping you the best I can so I can become an expert alongside of what you're trying to do. So remember that when you're asking those questions. So is there anything else like that around those ways that you might be wondering?
I actually had one. How did you get involved in like public schools? I mean, you're more, it seems like you're more known as like a Christian retreat speaker. Obviously, I know you've probably gone out of the realms of that, but how did you get into that realm of public school speaking?
Well, I haven't gone out of the realm of anything, man. I've never arrived. I do retreats. I do events that are, little. I'll never be above anything. Let me just say that first and foremost. Public schools, it really came down to just, putting to death a lot of my own fear, number one. But number two, there's a part in the Acts course where I talk about, if you haven't taken this Acts course yet, it's the Mountain of the Adjective. It's unlocking the 6 summits of creativity, but there's one I really focus in on. And as a person who teaches the Bible, I really had to ask the question, can I say something but without a Bible? And that really forced me to start to draw from sources like the Bible, although not referencing that in a public school. And it also forced me to really broaden my own creative process into like creating content that was value-based, that was compelling and clear and continuing, that could live in the separation of church and state inside of a building like a public school. That was a jump for me, just from a content perspective. And then the how-to, like how I got into the school. Well, first of all, that started with a lot of prayer, and just a lot of asking God to open some doors. And then somebody took a chance. I made a website, said I was available to do it, scared out of my mind, didn't know how I was going to go. And the phone rang and somebody took a chance, and that was it. It just sort of started working. And then I've had to work at it, and I've had to work at it, and I've had to work at it, and I've had to get better at it and better and better at it. And that's part of the reason why, I'm doing this with you with just this communication webinar on really parking on clear. So you can get that statement clear to you. Any other questions?
Eric, I just have a question about maybe more so your life as a speaker. You move around a lot, you're visiting a lot of different places, and I'm asking because myself and my husband, are now entering into a role where we will be moving from place as well. So how often, or do you at all, reuse material? And you kind of spruce that up a little bit if you are reusing the same stories?
And just give the old turd a polish? Well, I'll tell you what. I reuse material from time to time. I can't say that I've never done it. But I also track it in my calendar, like what I preached on, what I spoke on, what my message was at that audience at that time. So when I go back, or if I'm invited back to that place, I know what I did last time. That's very important to do, to track. That's just a easy tip in your calendar, your Google Calendar. Just jot in there what your notes were, what you did at that time. And then I would say the other thing is part of being clear on my audience. This is going to sound prideful, so you guys are all going to have to, and ladies, you're all going to have just to take this as best that you can. But I'm known in the people that I serve for taking a topic or a theme and really catapulting it forward. I don't take it lightly. I don't take their theme, their idea, their thought for their school, their church, their body, their club, their business. I don't take it lightly. What they're already doing and already thinking, I want to use all that momentum. And so when someone tells me our conference is called Story, well, my message is not from a can. My message is made for that conference, if that makes sense. There might be things that I pull out of the file drawer or out of the Evernote cabinet that go into this, but I'll challenge you as a speaker. If it's fresh for you, it'll always be fresh for your audience. And there's something about the art of communication that, yes, you got to continually make it fresh and make it real for you, but your message can become stale and monotonous and almost robotic if you don't dump that wine out and pour new wine in. And really, that's a big difference between living prepared and getting prepared for a message. I think there's a lot of speakers that get prepared for a message. I never want to get prepared. I want to live prepared. I want to live a rhythm of life that allows me to be able to be prepared to write a message. And that also comes down to margin. I look at, like, I got a buddy of mine. He just started preaching. Awesome guy. He was at a church up in Minneapolis, and great wife, young kids. His schedule is just too busy. I look at his schedule and I go, it's the same message everywhere. There's just no way he's got the margin right now to be able to do what he needs to do to love every one of those audiences. It's just, there's not enough hours in the day. So you got to be careful of that too, because if you book yourself too solid, you don't have time to create it, So track it in a calendar. So you know, and then you have the confidence. Oh, I spoke on this. And then if you go back to that same place, you won't feel like you're, just giving them the same old rehash, if you will. Know your audience and what their bullseye is, and tailor and customize and make and pursue some new wine for that event. And then the third thing I would say around that'll help you in that best is do your best to continue to live prepared versus get prepared for message. And that comes with how many books are you reading versus how many hours of Netflix do you watch? That's a really good question. How many hours are you on social media, and how many books did you read that week or that month? And if you're on social media, on YouTube or whatever, well, I mean, there's actually a lot of really good learning content on YouTube, but you get what I'm saying. Ashley, I'm just saying, like, look at the way that you invest your time. And if you're investing your time in stuff that's robbing your time, well, then you're going to have to keep getting prepared for messages. If you're investing in your time that's deepening your time, then when someone asks you, can you talk about faith? Can you talk about, the color purple? You have something to pull from, it's about living in the overflow versus trying to pour out. Any other questions? That's a good question. Mechanics, thoughts, something you're wondering about your own sermons? If questions keep coming, I'll just keep answering. Wait a second. Something came in. 1 second. Code. How would a YouTuber podcaster reach out to the audience or connect with them? Simple, with all of the same mechanics that I told you when it comes to creating those chemicals in the first part of it. You reach out to your audience just like you would to any other audience. There is an art form for radio. There's an art form for podcasting, for people that are doing the YouTubes, if you will. I'm not really great at that. I'm a little more old school, and give me a live audience and give me a microphone and let's leave all as a community. So there is some nuances that I've learned along the way, but really the live audience or the recorded audience, there's similarities, but your recorded audience, you really need to be able to capture them with the vocal tone, the cadence, the authority, the rhythm of your voice, but also really that meeting of that mind, that speaking to that heart. You got to draw them in topically very quick within the first little bit of your talk, if you will. When you prepare for a talk at a church, do you start with a Bible story or do you start with a story? Good question. I never start with the Bible story. I always start with some sort of story that's going to lead me to that. The reason is because when I'm at a church, I'm always looking at my sermon from the lens through someone who's never read the Bible before. That's just my style. I assume that my audience that's there, that's the first time they've been in church there in their entire life. And I want to draw them in and then give them something better. I want to meet them where they're at and take them where they need to be. That's why I love when churches open their church service with a cover song where it's not even a worship tune. It's like U2 or Adele or whatever. And it's like, it just, people that come to church that don't go to church are drawn in. There's just something about that. And so I approach communication a lot in the same way. Somebody had a question. Would these mechanics you talked about work in the same way in a written form? I think you're asking me, would some of the concepts of being clear, continuing, compelling, and creative, or maybe even the chemicals and the tension, would it work in the written form? Yeah, for sure, 100%. In fact, all of great sermons, all of great talks, they all start out in the written form. If you are a speaker and you aren't manuscripting your talk, like you're not typing out word for word manuscript, some people do, but if you're not on a computer or on something where you are actually physically working out those words, lines, phrases, like where you're physically working that out in written form, then you're selling yourself short. If you're just jotting it down a couple notes and you need to really bake that and let that stew. So yeah, all those mechanics can apply to the written form. Somebody had another question that was going to buzz in. I noticed you were going to.
Yeah. Just wanted to. I've kind of seen you do it, but I just wanted to kind of see if you can talk on it more. Dealing with just kind of rowdy audiences. Obviously, you're speaking to a lot of youth, and just kind of thoughts on, when they're just being really rowdy and distracting, or you got that one distracted kid. Have you handled that in the past, as far as getting their attention? And
first of all, I'll say this, and everybody please take this as kindly as you can, but also take it as a velvet 2x4. You ready? David, this isn't going to feel very good, so I don't want this just to be directed towards you, but if your audience is rowdy and they're not listening, it's your fault. as the communicator. It is your fault. Nobody else's fault. It's yours. Take the responsibility. You just haven't compelled them. You haven't captured them. You haven't commanded their attention. It's your fault. When you're in front of people and they're not listening to you, it's your fault. Just take it. Just say, look in the mirror next time that happens and just go, it's my fault. I need to get better. It happened to me all the time. It doesn't happen to me as much as it did. It happened to me yesterday. I had a kid in this audience who was so rowdy, David. He was so rowdy, I thought he had a learning disability. And so there was a part of me that was like going to call him out. And there was a part of me that was like, this kid might be physically handicapped, where he's doing this because it's like Tourette's. And you don't want to be that guy. You know what I mean? You don't want to like call somebody out who has a medical condition and then you're like, oh, sorry. You know what I'm saying? That's not a good day. I had a buddy that was an illusionist, and there was this guy in the front row. He kept doing like this, like with binoculars, like at this thing. He kept doing this. And then my friend goes, what are you doing, man? I'll just tell you what my tricks are if you're just trying to steal them. And come to find out, this kid, he was legally blind. And the only way he could see the trick is if he like did this with binoculars. You know what I'm saying? So you don't want to be that guy, David. You don't want to be that guy. So be careful with that, first of all. But take the responsibility, man. I'm telling you, take the responsibility. And when you're dealing with a student audience and they're tuned out, they got their AirPods in or earbuds, they're rowdy and they're not listening, it's your fault. Just, it sucks to say, but you got to soak it in, because then that'll really help you go, all right, what am I going to do different? What am I going to do better? How am I going to like command their attention? How can I direct this audience? I'll give you a couple pointers with real rowdy audiences. Man, I ride that chaos. I don't even try and corral that horse. Especially in a junior high audience, my funnel, my talk, like the rowdiness and the chaos, let that get on a surfboard and ride that wave. When this kid yesterday in my assembly, after every joke, kept going, ha, yeah, like that, like Lil Wayne, like, yeah, you know what I'm talking about? What? Okay. You know what I'm talking about? I can't imagine what that sounds like on the other end right now for some of you. But you know what I did? I said, hey, dude, what's your name? His name was Evan. I go, Evan, what? And he goes, Evan. I go, what? And he goes, Evan. I go, what? And he goes, Evan. I go, okay. I did it right back to him. He lost it. Like, he lost it. I won him over in that moment, and he shut up the whole rest of the assembly. It was glorious. And then I used him in this thing, and in a game, and he gave me some alias. He told me his name was Zach something. And I said, Evan, your name isn't Zach. It's Evan. You just want to put up a mask because you're afraid if you let it down, you and I would not be friends. Or we would be friends because I love you so much, Evan. And I went like this real creepy, and I looked at him. I went, like, I just took that rowdy kid and I won him over. And that's something that you really gotta you really gotta do that, right? When you get that rowdy kid, first of all, it's your fault, and secondly, you got to really ride that chaos, right? Ride that wave. Be cool with it. Like, let it flow. Don't be like, shh. I hate that. Like when pastors, like, or youth pastors, like, okay, guys, quiet down. The best thing to do, though, if you're at a camp and it's really rowdy, or you're in a church service, go, okay, we're gonna pray. Then everybody gets quiet for like 2 seconds, and then it's your fault again because you lose the room. You never really command it. So what I'm saying, though, is admit that it's your fault, ride that wave, that chaos. And then something that I really like to do, other than like just content to make sure you're capturing a room, is find out who the ringleader is in that group. Your specific example about a youth group with a rowdy patch of kids, find out the head of that snake. Who's the head of that snake? And chop it off with kindness. Just like you can be who you are, but you know what I mean? Like find out who it is and go towards them and do your best to win them over. Because if you win them over, I'm sorry guys, I'm sitting on this like exercise ball and my pants are so far up my back right now. I was dying. Does that make sense? Find the ringleader, really go to them. And then the other thing I was going to say is if you do those note cards that I showed you or that I talked about, like where you know what response you want your audience to have, the story or the thing or the topic or the part of your talk, and then the chemical that is, you know, going to elicit in your audience. When you start seeing the disconnects, you'll start seeing the room being disconnected. When you make those things connected, you'll start seeing the room be more connected. You'll also see with student audiences specifically, if you're talking about communicating to youth, you'll also see where you need to put in some humor. David, don't forget when you're talking to students that their life is a lot like, well, a TV commercial or a YouTube commercial. You know, when you're watching content on YouTube and then you get to that little yellow sliver and you know it's coming because it's a stupid ad. And then like there's an ad for Kraft mac and cheese and then you're upstairs making mac and cheese and you come and you finish it up. You know what I'm talking about? Your students' lives are a lot like that. You got to give them commercial breaks, mental breaks, recesses where they can laugh, they can air out their brain, they can look at their neighbor, they can say a word, they can repeat something with you, you can use something mechanical. You know, when you're really creating a talk for students and college students, don't be afraid to insert a commercial like they would if they're watching TV or YouTube. They just need a breather quick and then they can come back to what they do. That's, you know, couple little things. There's a few other things that I like to do. I like to get people's names. I like to have people repeat phrases after me. I like to interact with certain people in the audience. I like to go into the audience. I mean, it just depends on the situation. It depends on the person. But above all else, don't ever dehumanize your audience publicly. Don't ever chastise somebody for not listening. Don't ever shut them down or just call them out in a negative way. Do it with authority and kindness because, bro, I'm telling you, some of the most rowdy kids in assemblies and camps and places that I spoke, that I feel like they're on a mile away from me when I just meet them where they're at and I keep working on them and I keep chipping away at them. Those are the same kids that turn out to be absolute world changers. They come up to me at the end of that session and they go, dude, God changed my life this weekend. You know, because somebody loved them enough to work hard enough to grab their attention, but also didn't dehumanize them or police them in front of everybody. You know, I'll even say to teachers in public schools, hey, don't kick any of these students out of this gym. I don't care how rowdy they get, don't kick them out. They need to be in here. So, couple ideas, but those three for sure that I gave you. Good question, bro. But remember, it's your fault. Just take that in. Oh man, that's the hardest thing to say. Because trust me, there's been some rooms where I've completely lost the room and then I had to get it back. Or there's been some moments where I was like, man, I didn't really have anybody. I didn't really grab the audience tonight. They were a lot of murmuring and whatever. And then you look in the mirror and you just got to come to the realization that you go, I'm not as good as I think I am. I'm not as bad as I think I am, but it's my fault. I got to get better.
Yeah, I think where I was coming, because I always took that approach, because because I have like 2 or 3 leaders with me there, and like they're kind of getting on me to be like, you gotta like.
You gotta what? I lost you, buddy.
You there?
They were getting on you to, you got to be like, and then you went, "Bam."
Okay, to be more on them to behave. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, so and I've always kind of taken that approach of being like, you know, hey, it's my fault, you know. But then,
100%. And just ride that wave, man. Channel
Yeah.
that energy and get it to the place. And when you're talking with students, don't forget your funnel is this big. Like for students, it's huge message, right?
Mm.
For adults, your funnel's this and it's message. It's a lot bigger. You know, it's just different. So, you know, don't beat yourself up, but man, take ownership, ride that chaos, but you got to get better at commanding that room. You got to get better at using those techniques, using those tools at your disposal. One thing that I really like to do, and this is just something that we didn't even get to, but I really like to find out when you're preaching your sermon in your world, what is the ceiling, the emotional ceiling, and what is the emotional floor? What is the ceiling of your talk and the emotional floor of your talk? What's the high point and what's the low point of like empathy, heaviness, and like elation and joy and exuberance? I'll give you an example. I do a sermon on forgiveness. I've done it a few times. I'm literally throwing marshmallows into the crowd where a kid catches a marshmallow in his mouth, 12 rows into the audience. And then I tell a story about a lady that forgave a Nazi soldier in the Second World War, like minutes later. And I put the floor and the ceiling close together. So that's why people refer to people as dynamic communicators. The closest the highs and the lows, the higher the high, the lower the lows, the more you have in your audience laughing and the more that you have in your audience reflecting, the more dynamics that you're dealing with. And those things there create a lot of tension. And youth audiences live in the world of high highs and low lows. So you got to really bring the game. You got to bring some heat when you're coming up with content and a message where the dynamics or the floor or the ceiling of your talk is pretty big. Any other questions? It's 8:36. I know if you got to go, you got to go. It's okay. Anybody else? Okay. So November 15th, we've got another ACTS webinar coming up with Trevor from TFK. We're going to be talking about career and calling. How do you go after both? And then creative or critical thinking, rather. How do you get through when those dreams are dashed or disappointment sets in? Make sure you tune in for that. I'm overwhelmed with gratitude for all of you for journeying with me, for being a part of this. Thank you for supporting this, for your financial investment of $100 a year. Thank you for sticking around. If you're logged in on a free code or whatever the case is, I'm doing my best to equip you to do what you want to do when it comes to your best. I want you to discover that axe in 7 areas of your life to build and blaze what God has for you to do in a small amount of time with a lot of content for your life. I'm humbled and I'm honored. I can't tell you how thankful I am. And I'm asking you, please stick around. Please tell people about this. We're getting closer to our goal where the ACTS Academy will be self-sustainable. It'll have some sustainability. I don't take a salary from the ACTS Academy. This is just a labor of love and an investment into you. It's just one of those things that really the Holy Spirit's been dealing with me about. Like, it's not about where we go or where I go, but it's about where we go. It's not what is Eric doing, but how can I help you do what you're supposed to do? So let me keep pouring into you. But remember, this is not a static leadership resource. This is a dynamic leadership resource. It's bite-sized. It fits in your time. but you have to ask the questions. You have to suggest the courses. You have to let me know the topics that you're wondering about in the 7 buckets that we draw from, so I can make and I can answer, and we can live and breathe what you want to know as we journey together. Because a lot of us are asking the same questions. Thank you so much for tuning in tonight. If you have any questions, shoot them over. Another Axe Cast is coming up soon. Watch your inbox for that. I'm going to record that tomorrow. I can't wait for you to listen to that soon. If you don't currently listen to the Axe Academy podcast, it's available where all of the podcasts are. They're usually really short, enough to where you could just get it on about a 20-minute commute. Don't want to overwhelm you with information, but I do want to unpack one of those buckets every month. As we continue to grow, so will the content that we're producing. We're just doing the best we can to do with what we have currently. So thankful for the 106 students and supporters that we have now. I'm looking forward to what God has in store for all of you and for the future of the Axe Academy. Thanks so much for coming tonight. I hope that helped. There's 3 other C's that we didn't even get to on creativity, compelling, and continuing. That is another whole hour plus topic on their own. We'll dig into the next one in December when it comes to the other 3 C's as we journey forward. Keep swinging away. Remember, I want you to be a voice, not an echo. And for you to do that, you got to have a sharp axe. Keep kicking some axe. You know what I'm saying?